So thank you guys. I feel we're gonna repeat the presentation after this. But we'll see if we can keep it as short as possible and engaging and covering information. We're gonna start with the LCD in the presentation. And Boy is gonna follow, is gonna give our rock star presentation. And if you haven't, please do sign in before you leave, if you don't mind. Where? There's a sign-in sheet right back there. Ashley has it. Well, you can come and sign.
We are recording this one so that we can know more about it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hoy Rodomsky. I'm the South Coast Regional Rep with DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so I'm not Meg Reed because she's busy above my pay grade. So I'm here today. So we have two logos. The one with the O is for Oregon Coastal Management Program. It's a state-federal partnership between NOAA and State of Oregon under CBEMP Coastal Management Act. Do I need to go into all this? Okay, sorry. Next, I'm trying to disseminate some knowledge. Okay. Oh. Oop. Okay, I guess I didn't read the title of the slide. Estuary planning. That's what we're here today for the open house. Am I doing? Okay, so the music program in Oregon is set up with 19 statewide planning goals, and the ones that's under the coastal resources are 16 through 19. And today we're talking about goal 16 estuaries and goal 17 coastal shorelands. Yeah, please. So as I was saying earlier about the Oregon Coastal Management Program being a state federal partnership, the partnership is within the approved Oregon Coastal Zone, which is from the crest of the coastal range down to the ocean. So anything within that spatial extent is the Oregon Coastal Management Area. And the way the program is set up in Oregon is that it's a network program, and we have state agencies who are part of the program and also local governments. So counties and cities, we're all part of the same program. It just DLCD is the one that's administering or the coordinators of the program, but we're all part of the same program. So NOAA gives money to, so it's two carrots that NOAA gives us. One is money to run a program. I'm fully funded by NOAA, so is Meg. The second carrot is the Federal Consistency Authority, which we get a review for the projects in the coastal zone. So if something was to the east of the crest, we don't get a review. West of the crest, we get a review. Next, please. Oh, thanks. So coastal goals. 16 estuary, 17 coastal shorelands, 18 beaches and dunes, and 19 ocean resources. So the state of Oregon, because ocean is the territorial sea, so the state of Oregon does the planning for that, but 16 through 18 is implemented through local governments. Next, please. Why are estuaries important? Because they are, I don't know, anybody want to answer? Maybe Chris.
Estuaries are very important for commerce, for recreation. They are super productive for fish and wildlife. And so they have a huge economic role in the state, both from an industrial component and from an environmental component.
Do I need to repeat for that? Commerce. What did you come over here and repeat that? Yes, yeah.
Into the microphone.
Thanks, Wei. I think it's important to be able to be heard. But estuaries are super important. I work for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. My name is Chris Clare, and I'm a habitat protection biologist. Been on the planning team here with the Partnership for Coastal Watersheds, and and CBEMP planning for as long as we've been working on that, 5 to 6 years at least at a minimum. So Wade had asked about why our estuary is important. And for my agency, they're super important for production of fish and wildlife. They have a lot of edge habitats and eelgrass and super productive areas for juvenile salmon to feed in, young rockfish, even the herring, and they all create a lot of energy for the commercial and recreational fisheries of Oregon. But I think Mike Dunning was here with the Port of Coos Bay earlier, and I think it's important to recognize that estuaries are also super important for not only recreation and fish and wildlife resources, but for the cities. The majority of Americans and people in the world are a good component of them live on bays and estuaries because they're interfaces for commerce and the industrial communities. And so understanding how to use them wisely is super important. Yeah. Yes, it does. It grows in anywhere there's salinity. There's a couple species and there's other seagrass and other than Zostra marina, which has the long leaves on it. There's also Japonica, which has a very short leaf and is exotic, but doesn't necessarily compete or us.
All the way up to the, let's say, there is no grass growing.
The bay does not support eelgrass everywhere that there's substrate. All the bottom of the bay is not eelgrass, and that's sort of unfortunate from a fisheries component because eelgrass is very important for both cover and for food for the macroinvertebrates that feed fish. But eelgrass grows generally in Coos Bay from an elevation of -3 to +3. And it could grow deeper. In Puget Sound, it grows to -10, but Coos Bay suffers somewhat from sedimentation and turbidity issues. And our shop in ODFW believes that the lack of light penetration to the deeper depths is part of the reason that eelgrass can't get enough energy to grow deeper. And that's where my shop comes in, working in the uplands with the forestry community and the other sediment producing sources to try and improve conditions there so that the bay is not quite as muddy at times during the winter, so it doesn't hurt eelgrass. But it only grows generally, and we have an audience member here that is as much of an eelgrass expert or more than I am, Craig Cornu, but it generally only grows from about -3 to +3, unless Craig wants to correct me there. So, and it requires specific velocity and current regimes. And so if you and I took a drone or flew a plane low and slow over the bay, you would see large patches off of Pigeon Point. There's one not on the bedrock, but just upstream from there, the old Sitka dock off of the airport. But it's very much in a patchwork network up through the bay, clear on up onto the East Bay. There's eelgrass off of Kentucky Slough. There's a few patches that I'm pretty sure is Zostra. I haven't gone and sampled the leaves all the way up to Shinglehouse Slough. There's a patch up Catching Slough. So I hope that answers some of what you're asking.
Thank you, Chris. So goal 16, again, is estuary resources and everything that Chris just talked about. Next. Okay. So in Oregon, how we plan for our estuaries is through estuary management plans. And these are adopted as part of the comprehensive plans that every local jurisdiction is required to adopt, whichever goal is applicable to their jurisdiction. And there are 3 management unit types: natural, conservation, development, and each different category allows different uses of the estuary. So development has your most intensive uses, and natural your least intensive, and try to keep it as natural as possible. And so each estuary is also categorized by one of these 3 classifications. The 3 estuaries in Oregon that's development is Columbia, Yaquina, and Coos Estuary. And permitting processes for these estuaries, as I was saying earlier, that the Oregon Coastal Management Program is a network program. So the permits are required from all these other agencies: DSL, DEQ, ODMW, ODA, SHPO, and for consistency, which I mentioned earlier, is our authority to review any further permits or actions in the coastal zone. And so again, it's a network program, and local governments and other city agencies are part of our program. It's not just the LCD. Goal 17, coastal shorelands. These are basically lands that's adjacent to the estuary. So anything that's tidal influence. So not just where saltwater stops, but tidal to the head of tide. So it could be freshwater tidal areas if there's any in these estuaries. This is our mapping tool, coastalatlas.net. And you can go on here to see how the different management units are located in different estuaries in Oregon. And it's just a close zoomed in part. I guess this is see North Bend and I guess North Bend of the river. And I think next slide is just questions. Any questions? Thank you.
I have a question. Sorry. I'm sorry. The slide that you talked about, a couple back where you said development and it's to run through all these agencies. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of like, so planners are the coordinators of development proposals. So local planners, for example, if there's a permit that I like to use the example of a landfill as an illustrative point where DEQ regulates landfills. So they do permits for landfills, but where you can site that landfill is dependent on the local zoning. And so if the applicant wants to come and do a landfill, then they will ask the planner if where they want to propose landfill is okay or is allowed or not. And if it is, then they can go and get the permit from DEQ. And DEQ won't give the permit until there's local approval for land use for that site. So similarly, at a state level, projects that has intersects with these other city agencies will also get their input as part of the process, as network process. So DLCD, we don't have permits that we process. We're the coordinators of all these different permit programs. Is that?
Okay, we're going to take a minute and then we're going to shift to Jill Rolfe, who is going to join us in just a second.
We're actually gonna move that podium a little bit. This is not.
Yeah, if we move it, I can break this.
All the logistical things that we didn't pick up. Okay, thank you. Not that I really want to be seen, but. Basically, this is just an overview of where we're at and why we're here and why it's important to move this project forward. And I have to give credit to Jenny Schmidt, who actually put this together for me a long time ago. We've used the same presentation. It is just such a good overview that I didn't see a need to really change it. So Partnership for Coastal Watersheds. Basically, we're a diverse group of community members and citizen scientists with associations to cultural interests, economic development, natural resource protection, government agencies, business interests, and locals in Coos Bay area. So the Coos Bay Estuary Management Plan, what is it? It's a written plan with maps and data used in current decision making. It allows estuary use for economic and social benefits while protecting environmental values, including procedures and standards in reviewing proposed estuary development. And I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with using the plan, but the plan is divided up by, like Pei said, the development, you might have development aquatic. We also have upland. So in our plan, we segment out goals 16 and 17, and we use 17 is divided up into also management units. And then those management units basically are designed to coincide with your aquatic units below. So we have had a lot of change of conditions. So the original plan was developed in the late 70s, early 80s. It went through a pretty extensive process. And it went through many, many, many public hearings. And basically when it was approved was 1985, or actually, 1985, and it was implemented in 1986. It did go through a small periodic review time period when that was required in the 1990s, but it really hasn't had too much update since that time. So since the 1970s era information is older and there's been a lot of changes in the system, especially from economic drivers. So the plan is mostly written around timber, fishing, and agriculture. Not that those aren't still important, because that is who we are. Those are our basis. But it was important that we included tourism, recreational uses, such as fishing, paddlecraft, dune, social considerations. And we're trying to modernize the plan and bring all that information in. So what are we doing? So creating a repository of data, the community and lands and waterway source, and the Coos Bay estuary map atlas, which Amanda will go further into in the next presentation. So we, PCW, worked on this project. We've used contractors in the process, brought the information together. Then we engaged the broader community through a series of focus groups, workshops, and public open houses. Now, the original Coos Bay Estuary Management Plan was done in a similar fashion, and we tried to use that to update it. So we were kind of using the same format. So communities, lands, and waterway is the data source. It's an encyclopedia compilation of all of the available data describing social, economic, and environmental conditions in the area. There's 18 chapters assessing the biological, physical, and social economic systems. Chapters include a summary, climate change summary, and multiple data summaries. And all of this is online for you to review. So the Coos Estuary Map Atlas. So the map atlas, the idea of the map atlas was to pull all this data in and try to use this to inform any future updates. So this information was presented in focus groups, and there were 3 focus groups: an economic development, a natural resource and protection, and a social cultural interest. They were pretty large work groups. We had some great students that helped put ideas on boards. We had great discussion. So we participated in these, prioritized recommendations for the estuary and shoreland uses. It resulted in priorities and opportunities for an update to the estuary management plan. So the idea was to have the community provide the input of what the plan should look like. So putting it all together, PCW integrates the focus group and the public input with which will identify areas where the most of the stakeholders are in agreement. It identified the areas that needed to be updated. It identified a more intensive public input. And then, of course, it identified the data gaps. And so these recommendations were put together basically along with these products, and they were presented to planning commissions and the Board of Commissioners in 2019. And they were given options for updates. And so there was several different options for updates. We could take what we had as the basis and start with phase 1, which is where we're at, or we could continue to work on a full revision. And the board decided that the councils decided that it was better if we had a starting place. So this is our starting place. And then in order to the full revision, that's going to be at least 4 to 6 more years of working in the community to bring that up to date. So that was a pretty fast, speedy. Here you are. Do you have any questions about it? Nope.
Hey. Let's see how fast and furious we can go through this. So my job tonight is just to talk about what we're actually doing for the current update, which we'll call phase 1. So I'm going to talk about the update process and the recommendations that we're going to be making, and then give you some time to question and answer. And of course, we'll still be here for another hour if you guys really have questions about the products that we're talking about bringing forward. As Jill said, she kind of already overviewed this. The intent really was to make for the current update is to really focus on making the product more usable, to bring all three jurisdictions back into alignment under one document, and then make that product much more accessible to the public. We have 3 different jurisdictions that we have to adopt products through. And so we will be taking an amended version of the CBEMP, both phase part 1, part 2, through various implementing ordinances through those 3 jurisdictions. I'm going to talk about the CBEMP itself. If you haven't looked at it, is about 500 pages. That is just mostly part 1 is 500 pages. Part 1 focuses on these elements. They are the goal provisions, descriptions of the management units, and then a few other sections. But we have gone through this document and made changes throughout the document to improve plan usability and a number of other things. We focused mostly on digitizing the entire document for the first time, so it won't just be in printed format. We added hyperlinks so that you can navigate through the document. We added purpose statements to the beginning of each chapter so that you can end to the descriptions of each of the management units. We also are integrating the data atlas that Jill was mentioning and the Coos Bay data source into the CBEMP. We're including references in part 1 to that document, which is largely housed in part 2. But importantly, we're actually taking 3 different jurisdictions' version of the CBEMP because each one of them has a different version, and we'll be integrating it back into one document, which means pulling all of the management units that are currently only in North Bend's plan and the management units that are currently only in Coos Bay's plan back into the county document. So there will be a total of 144 management units in the CBEMP. This is just a diagram of what those management units are. And then we did have to do some conflict resolution between those management units. So the documents that will be presented to the county commission and the city councils will include really detailed analysis of how we did this. Once we did that, though, we also had to include a couple of policies that only existed in the Coos Bay plan because they weren't applicable to any of the management units that were outside of Coos Bay. So we're pulling them back into the document. There's not being any changes to these policies. They're just being taken in literally from one document to the other. But we are making a couple of policy changes, recommendations. Specifically, we're making recommendations to change the policy number 36, which is about plan update, and policy number 39, which is about citizen involvement. So we are recommending that a CBEMP advisory committee be established to manage this multi-jurisdictional document. It will, at present, the recommendation is to include representatives from each of the 3 jurisdictions, as well as representatives from the port, both of the tribes, and then a minimum of 3 citizens on this appointed body that will meet regularly to review and update the CBEMP as it moves forward. Functioning like a planning commission, in so much as that that body would make recommendations that would be applicable to all 3 jurisdictions. They'd make a recommendation that would go to the planning commissions of the other jurisdictions for adoption. We are also recommending a process for doing a comprehensive update, which we are recommending a minimum of every 10 years or as needed. That comprehensive update process would require an additional technical advisory committee and a citizen advisory committee. So there's lots of opportunities to become involved in the management of this document. The other thing I spent a lot of time doing was fixing Scrivener's errors. So the document had been hand typed and then transferred into a digital format. So there were quite a lot of random small errors throughout the document. So we fixed as many of them as we could. And then we also updated agency names as necessary. We added a few additional definitions or modified a couple of definitions. These are largely because the definition for, say, floodway has changed at the federal level. So we're trying to reflect those modifications. So that was part one. That's a 500-page document. Part two is the factual database and the inventory itself. This is where we're really integrating the map atlas and the data source into part two. And we're changing, by doing that, quite a lot of this document. We're eliminating certain chapters that will no longer be necessary and instead inserting the data source and the background data in section 9 of this document. So the new table of contents looks like that. We did not, however, I should say, amend all of the sections of this document. There are a couple of chapters that were not modified at all. Dredge disposal is one of them. So once we finish, we have those two documents, part one and part two, and the maps that are part of them. We had to amend or make recommendations to amend implementing ordinances for all three jurisdictions, because this document is currently adopted in all three of these different jurisdictions between Coos Bay, North Bend, and Coos Bay and Coos County. So we are going to be going before each of those bodies to make specific recommendations for how to align this document, with the focus really on making the CBEMP into the controlling document. And then really bringing all of the management units in and all the policy statements into the same document, and then clarifying exactly how we're going to move forward on administration of this plan. And this is our adoption schedule, small print. The basic point, though, from moving forward from now is that we're completing what we're hoping to be our public comment period right now. We're asking people to submit comments by May 26th so that we can integrate all of the comments that have been received to date into the staff report and the application that's going to go before each of the three bodies. Those applications will be submitted hopefully by June 1, so that we can submit for the post-acknowledgement plan amendment process, and so that we can get on the schedule to go before the planning commissions of all three bodies in July, with the intent of going in August for public hearings before the city councils and the county commissioners, and then going back to the county commission on September 6th for final adoption. That is the goal. We do have all of this information available on the website from the county. This slide provides the link to that. There are also QR codes and pieces of paper in the back there that have a QR code to it. And this will continue to be updated as new information is made, or different versions of the document are made. And we'll make sure we also have the full staff reports up there as well when we have them. Hopefully June 1, right? So, questions? Craig.
Just to be clear, when we say adoption by September of this year, that is for the phase 1 part of this.
Correct.
With the rest of the revisions still to be worked on and public comment still open for that whole process that Jill mentioned would take a few years. Okay, just want to make sure that was.
Absolutely. So what Craig's saying, just for the recording, is that what we're talking about right now is the limited phase 1 adoption. And we are going to be including in our recommendation to the county commission and the city councils all of the comments we're receiving that would recommend that we would go forward with a phase 2. But at present, all we're looking at adopting is part 1, phase 1, and we will then be hoping that we get concurrence from the county commission and the city councils to move forward with phase 2. Yes.
When you were discussing the citizens advisory committee, so there's citizen advisory committee and a technical advisory committee, and was there a third committee?
So the CBEMP advisory committee is, I know none of these titles are great. Somebody can come up with better titles. So there's the standing committee, what I'm going to call the standing committee, which is the CBEMP advisory committee. That is intended to really be the multi-jurisdictional administration tool for this document. The other two committees are really recommendations from us for how we would move forward with phase two, because we know that we need a broader citizen advisory committee as well as a technical advisory committee to really drive phase two. Yeah.
I had another question about, you mentioned that the chapters, the pieces about the dredged oil, the disposals aren't being touched.
Yeah,
So
it's,
just wondering why.
well, I digitized it, but that's it. So we've digitized it, but it hasn't been modified at present. That will definitely be something that I would expect would be part of the work program for phase two. Anybody else? No. So on the walls around us are the regulatory maps that are associated with part one. These are digitized versions of the Mylar maps that were originally adopted in 1985. And are happy to have you go and look at them. We have our GIS tech here who can answer any questions about them. The other maps that we've been talking about, which are the background maps, are available on the website. And within a week or two, we will also hopefully have them available on a GIS layering tool. So you can look at all of them. Yes.
Sorry, I forgot I had another question.
Good.
So for the turnaround, so like the goals to get comments by May 26th and then submit
June 1.
June 1st. So that's congrats on taking that. But I'm just wondering, how will people know what's actually getting submitted through DLCD?
So the set. Yeah, so how can people view what is actually being submitted for that PAPA?
Yeah.
My intention is to send one final set of documents to Jill to put onto the website concurrently with submitting those applications for the PAPA. So that set of documents will be put onto the website and replace the current ones. So the draft that is on the website right now, I think is dated April 19th or something along those lines. And you'll have a new version that will be dated probably May 28th. So, yeah.
DLC's website for the posted content. You can actually sign up to get all posted content and updates like those, all of that are there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know I get a lot of emails.
Yeah.
I wish I would have signed up for the right one, but, yeah. But I know there's some folks that like, you know, see what gets officially submitted and so like, once the hearing process starts, you know, let's say if there's other ideas that emerge that, didn't get filed with the state, how can those comments from community members and organizations be implemented into the plan once that hearing process?
Well, we have discussed actually having a stopping or sort of a static point at the end of the planning commission hearings in which we incorporate the comments we received from planning commissions so that the version that goes to the city council and the county commissions is sort of that approved as of that point, or at least incorporating as many comments as possible as of that point. But then, of course, we're not going to be putting out a new version of this document every week because we had no idea what people would be commenting on.
Yeah. You know, about everything that's going on with so much, but you know, with the hearing process tends to be when we hear more from folks, so.
I know. Typically the last hearing too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just good to know.
Okay. Well, I'm going to hopefully get somebody to turn off a recording. And then we can continue talking. Thank you all for coming.
And then-
Is it? Yeah.
And then-